right, everyone, welcome back. It's time to dive into this absolute mountain of a patch that is League of Legends 25.04. This is not your run-of-the-mill patch. This one's got some big changes. It feels like Riot's kind of like shaking things up a bit.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's more than just balance changes this time around. It's like a shift in like their philosophy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like even like the way they're doing patch numbers now.
Oh, yeah.
Like getting rid of that whole like season 1, act 1 business and just going to straight chronological order.
Right.
Like 25.04.
Yeah, exactly. It's like way easier to understand which patch you're on.
Right.
And speaking of things that are easier to understand, or at least Riot's trying to make easier to understand, let's talk about this honor revamp.
Yeah, this is a big one.
This is a big one.
It's no longer just about being nice for a season.
Right.
Now your honor level is dynamic and constantly reflecting your recent behavior.
Oh, so there are no more honor resets?
Nope. Honor 3 is the new baseline for everybody.
Okay.
But if you're consistently awesome, honor levels 4 and 5 will get you some pretty sweet perks.
Okay.
Battle Pass XP, special pings.
Right.
It's kind of like Riot saying, hey, good behavior gets you cool stuff.
Yeah, be good, get goodies. Okay. What about if you're not so good?
Well, and honor levels 1 and 2 will mean penalties.
Right.
Like restricted rewards,
Yeah.
chat restrictions,
Yeah.
basically just letting those players know disruptive behavior isn't going to fly.
Right, yeah. Seems like a pretty big push to really build a positive community.
Yeah.
But, I mean, let's be real. The biggest incentive, I think, are those 3 honor skins. I mean,
Yeah.
come on. Permanently unlocking Malzahar, Shen, and Akshan skins just for hitting honor 5 for the first time.
Right.
Plus Grey Warwick and Medieval Twitch with their chromas.
Yeah.
I mean, sign me up.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's definitely a smart move, I think. They're using both like rewards and consequences to encourage positive behavior.
Right.
And honestly, who doesn't love free skins, right? But enough about being good sports. Let's talk about the changes that will actually affect how we play the game.
Okay.
And some of the champion updates are really turning heads.
All right.
Ashe, for example, is getting some much-needed love.
Yeah, I know Ashe players have been asking for some buffs for a while, so what exactly is changing with her kit?
Well, her Q, W, and R are all getting damage increases.
Okay.
Particularly her R. We're talking 25.S1.4, 650 base damage.
Wow.
It's a significant boost that'll make her a much bigger threat,
Right.
especially late game.
Yeah, that sounds very scary. Ashe might become like the queen of late game with that much damage.
Right.
Now, for all the Diana mains out there, it seems like she's getting kind of a mixed bag this time around. So,
Like
yeah.
it's all about fine-tuning her role. If you're a jungle Diana fan, brace yourself, because her passive monster damage is getting nerfed.
Okay.
Riot's clearly trying to rein in her dominance in the jungle meta.
So less power farming for our moon girl. But what about Diana mid? Is she getting any love at all?
Actually, yes.
Yeah.
Her Q and Ws are getting damage buffs,
Oh, okay.
which is really interesting. This could potentially open up some non-assassin builds for her,
Yeah.
so maybe we'll see some Bruiser Diana or even some hybrid builds.
That's really cool. I'm very interested to see how players adapt to this and what kind of new strategies come out.
Right.
Speaking of adapting, Elise is getting a bit of a role shift this time around.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Her human form W damage is going down,
Her?
but her spider form is getting buffs to cool down and attack speed.
Oh, interesting.
So it's almost like Riot is kind of nudging her back towards being primarily a jungler.
Right. Yeah, it seems like they want to emphasize that aspect of her kit.
Right.
So less burst damage in lane, but more skirmishing power in the jungle. That's a pretty clear direction.
For sure.
What about Mel? What's happening with everyone's favorite Blade Mistress?
Well, Mel is getting some changes aimed at increasing counterplay against her. So that means her safety net is getting a little bit smaller. Her Q, W, and E are all getting range and duration nerfs,
Okay.
making her a lot easier to punish in the early game.
So less of an early game bully, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But don't worry, they're not leaving her high and dry.
Okay.
To compensate her, E and R getting increased damage scaling,
Okay.
which will make her a significant threat in the late game.
Okay, so less lane dominance, but more late game potential.
All right.
It's all about balance.
Exactly.
Speaking of balance, there's another champion who is getting some attention, and that is Nautilus.
Yeah.
So.
Nautilus is getting a nice buff to his Q damage.
Okay.
We're talking a substantial increase here.
All right.
That'll make him a much bigger threat early game. Think of it like a reward for landing those hooks.
Right. Land the hook, chunk the enemy. Perfect.
Perfect.
All right. Well, there's another champion who's getting some love this patch, and it's a change that might surprise some people.
Okay.
Teemo Jungle.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Teemo Jungle is getting a direct buff to his E damage against monsters.
okay.
So that's a significant change that should make his jungle clears a lot smoother and faster.
Wow, so they're really trying to make Teemo Jungle a thing. I wonder how that's going to affect the jungle meta. Now, for every buff, there's usually a nerf lurking around the corner, and this time it seems like Warwick top lane is in the crosshairs.
That's right. Warwick top lane is getting hit with a Q mana cost increase.
Okay.
This is a targeted nerf aimed at reducing his lane dominance
Right.
without affecting his jungle performance too much.
So trying to keep him strong in the jungle, but tone down his power in the top lane.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Now let's talk about a champion who is always a hot topic, Yasuo.
Yasuo.
So Yasuo.
He's getting a pretty significant change to his passive.
Mhm.
They're removing his crit damage reduction.
Wait, really? Wow, that's a big deal. What's the reasoning behind that change?
Well, this change is all about encouraging Yasuo players to build crit items earlier in the game.
Okay.
You know, before he had kind of a built-in safety net with that crit damage reduction.
Right.
Now he'll be more vulnerable early game if he doesn't prioritize those crit items.
Right, so it's higher risk, higher reward now. If he builds crit early, he can be a monster. But if he doesn't, he's going to be much easier to take down.
Exactly.
I'm interested to see how players adapt their build paths and strategies for this. All right, we've covered a lot of champion updates already. Should we move on over to item adjustments?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
And get ready for some big changes,
Okay.
especially for those who love building tanky.
Uh-oh. What's happening to our beloved tank items?
Oh, let's just say they're getting a little bit of a reality check.
Okay.
Abyssal Mask, Fimbulwinter, Heartsteel, and Unending Despair are all getting nerfed this patch.
Wow, they're hitting the popular tank items pretty hard. What's the reasoning behind these nerfs?
Well, it's simple. These items have been way too dominant.
Okay.
You know, they've made tanks incredibly difficult to kill, especially in the late game. So these nerfs are an attempt to bring tankiness down a notch
Okay.
and make tanks a bit more vulnerable.
So squishy champions can breathe a sigh of relief. What about crit ADCs? Are they getting any love this patch?
Actually, yes. They are getting a nice little present in the form of a price reduction for Infinity Edge.
Ooh, cheaper Infinity Edge. That's a big deal for crit ADCs. What kind of impact do you think that will have?
Well, this change is all about accelerating their power spike.
Okay.
By making Infinity Edge cheaper, they can reach that core build faster,
Right.
which means they can deal more damage and have a bigger impact in the mid-game.
So crit ADCs will be hitting their stride earlier and packing a bigger punch.
For sure.
All right. And what about our boots? Any changes there?
You bet. There's some interesting tweaks to a few of the boot options. Mercury treads are getting a cost reduction,
Okay.
which will make them a more appealing choice for tanks.
Okay.
Plated steel caps are getting a damage reduction nerf, while symbiotic souls are getting a move speed buff.
Interesting. So they're trying to fine-tune the boot choices and make each option more distinct?
Exactly.
Okay. But let's talk about something a bit more unique. Remember Otacon, that monstrous creature who sometimes joins the battle?
Of course. How could we forget about Otacon? Well, Riot's adjusting the rules for how its form spawns in the game.
Wait, so it has different forms?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Otacon can spawn in various forms with different abilities and strengths, and now those forms will be determined by the bloodiness of the game.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What do they mean by bloodiness?
Essentially, it means that early game aggression
Okay.
and kill streaks will influence which form Otacon takes. So if the game's a bloodbath with a lot of early kills, Otacon is more likely to spawn in a more aggressive form. But if he is more passive with fewer early kills, Otacon might take on a more defensive form.
Oh, wow. That's a really clever way to make Otacon feel more dynamic and integrated into the flow of the game. It's not just a random event anymore. It actually responds to how the game is being played.
Exactly.
I love that. Okay, so we've covered champion updates, item adjustments, and even Otacon's new tricks. What else is brewing in this massive patch?
Well, get ready to assemble your teams and strategize because the 2025 Clash schedule has been revealed.
Clash. I love Clash. It's always so much fun to compete with friends and, test our skills against other teams. So what does the schedule look like this year?
Get ready for 6 thrilling tournaments.
Ooh, 6.
And the best part is they're bringing back the Arif and Aram Cups.
No way. Arif and Aaron Cups are back. That's amazing news. Those are always some of the most fun and chaotic Clash tournaments.
For sure.
I can't wait.
It's a chance to just really let loose and try out some crazy strategies and builds.
Yeah.
But that's not all. To make things even better, they're reducing the VP requirements for rewards.
Wait, really? So it'll be easier to earn those sweet Clash trophies and banners?
Exactly. More rewards for everyone.
Okay.
It's a win-win situation. Now let's shift our focus to some ARAM and ARF-specific changes. Teemo, the bane of many ARAM players' existence, is getting a mixed bag of adjustments.
Oh, here we go. The Teemo Aram saga continues. So what are they doing to him this time?
Well, they're reducing his R damage and slow,
Okay.
which is a welcome change for anyone who's ever been on the receiving end of a Teemo Shroom party.
Right.
But to compensate, they're increasing his R charges and giving him some ability haste reduction.
Oh, okay. So less damage per shroom, but more shrooms overall. That's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how those changes balance out. What about other ARAM adjustments? Anything else noteworthy?
There is one more interesting change. Unending Despair is getting buffed in ARAM
Okay.
with an increased healing multiplier.
Okay.
So this could potentially make it a more viable option for tanks in that game mode.
Okay. So a little love for ARAM tanks. I like it. And what about ARF? Any changes over there?
Just one small but potentially significant adjustment. Ranged champions are seeing their attack speed bonus slightly nerfed.
Oh, so they're trying to tone down the range dominance a bit in ARAM.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Now, before we move on, we can't forget about the Mythic Shop. What goodies await us this time?
Get your Mythic Essence ready, because some awesome prestige skins are entering the rotation.
Oh, nice.
We're talking Mythmaker Cassiopeia, Pulsefire Lucian, Psyops Ezreal, KDA Evelyn, and Project Zed.
Wow, that's a seriously impressive lineup. Those are some of the most coveted prestige skins in the game. But for every new addition to the Mythic Shop, there are also some items that are leaving.
That's right. Prestige Linterbeast Fiora, Prestige Porcelain Lux, Prestige Porcelain Kindred, Prestige Dragonmancer Reckon, and a whole bunch of other goodies are on their way out.
Okay.
So if you've been eyeing any of those items, now is your last chance to snag them.
Good reminder, don't miss out on those limited time offers. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we have to acknowledge the unsung heroes of every patch, the bug fixes.
Absolutely. Riot has been hard at work squashing bugs.
Yes.
And this patch is no exception. They've addressed a long list of issues,
Oh, good.
including the infamous Rengar boots bug, the ultimate pets drawing minion aggro,
Oh, yeah.
and many more.
That's always great to hear. It's those little quality of life improvements that can make a big difference in the overall gaming experience. And of course, no patch would be complete without some shiny new skins and chromas to drool over.
You're absolutely right. We got the stylish Masked Justice skin line dropping for Lucian, Senna, and Yoni,
Oh,
and the visually stunning Quantum Galaxy Slayer Zed skin.
very nice.
Plus, there are matching chromas for the Masked Justice line.
Oh, nice.
You can really customize your look.
So much style. It's clear that Riot is pulling out all the stops with this patch. We've got champion updates, item adjustments, clash news, ARAM and ARF tweaks, Mythic Shop rotations, bug fixes, and a whole lot of new cosmetic goodies.
It's a lot to take in, right?
It is. But we've broken down the most important changes and what they mean for you.
Right.
Now it's time to dive even deeper and explore how these updates will affect your individual playstyle and strategies. Exactly. We've laid the groundwork, but the real fun begins when you start applying this knowledge to your own games. Stay tuned, because in the next part, we'll be analyzing how these changes might impact different champions, roles, and playstyles. It's going to get interesting.
All right, so let's break down some of these champion changes a bit further and talk about how they might actually play out on the Rift.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in seeing how those Diana changes shake things up.
Yeah.
Nerfing her jungle but buffing her mid, it feels like they're walking a tightrope.
It is a delicate balance, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Reducing her passive damage to monsters is a pretty direct way to curb her jungle clear speed, which has been a big part of her dominance in that role.
Right.
But by buffing her Q and W damage, they're opening up possibilities for her in the mid lane.
Right. So like you were saying earlier, maybe we'll see more bruisers or like hybrid builds instead of just going full assassin every game.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what kind of creative builds people come up with.
Me too. It's always fun when a champion gets changes that kind of encourage that experimentation. Speaking of experimentation, let's talk about Elise. Shifting her power more towards jungling seems like a pretty clear message from Riot.
Yeah, it feels like they're saying, hey, Elise, we love you, but maybe stick to the jungle from now on.
Right.
But do you think those spider form buffs will be enough to make up for that human form W damage nerf?
I think it depends on the player and their playstyle.
Okay.
For those who already enjoy Elise in the jungle, These changes are definitely a positive.
Right.
Her clear speed should be faster, and her ganking potential should be even stronger.
Right.
But for those who prefer her as a lane bully, well, it might be time to try out some other champions.
So jungle Elise enthusiasts rejoice, but lane Elise fans might need to adapt.
Exactly.
It's all about finding the right champion for your style, right? Now let's move on to another champion who's getting some significant adjustments, and that's Mel. Those counterplay changes feel like a pretty big deal.
They are, remember how we were talking about Mel's safety net getting smaller?
Right.
Well, that's exactly what these changes are doing.
Yep.
Reducing the range on her Q, the duration on her W, and the root duration on her E means she's going to be much more vulnerable in the early game.
Yeah, no more just casually strolling up to your opponent and unleashing a flurry of blades.
Right.
You'll actually have to think about your positioning and timing now.
Exactly. It's all about giving players more opportunities to outplay Mel and punish her for mistakes. However, they're not completely gutting her early game.
Oh.
Increasing the damage scaling on her E and R ensures that she'll still be a threat as the game progresses.
Right, so less of a lane bully, but more of a late game hyper carry.
Right.
Sounds like a fair trade-off to me.
For sure.
Now let's talk about a champion who's getting some much-needed love, and that's Nautilus. That Q damage buff feels significant.
Oh, think about it. Nautilus is all about landing those hooks.
Right.
And with this buff, those hooks are going to pack a serious punch, especially in the early game.
Yeah. Land the hook, chunk the enemy, win the lane. Sounds like a recipe for success to me.
Exactly.
I can already see those Nautilus players out there grinning from ear to ear.
I bet they are. He'll be a much bigger threat in lane, and he'll be able to contribute more to those early skirmishes and ganks. It's a solid buff that can push him back into the meta.
Speaking of meta shifts, let's talk about Teemo. And not just any Teemo, Teemo Jungle.
Yeah.
Buffing his E damage to monsters feels like a bold move.
It is. It's a clear sign that Riot wants to see Teemo Jungle become a viable option.
Okay.
And honestly, I'm all for it. It adds another layer of diversity to the jungle pool. And let's be real, who doesn't love a good Teemo Shroom surprise?
I'm sure enemy junglers will be thrilled about that.
Right.
But hey, more options is always a good thing, right? Now, for every buff, there's usually a nerf lurking nearby, and this time it seems like Warwick top lane is the target.
You got it. Increasing his Q mana cost is a pretty targeted nerf, aimed at reducing his sustain in the top lane. It's not a huge nerf, but it will force Warwick players to manage their mana more carefully, especially in the early game.
Right, so no more spamming Q to win every trade.
Right.
You'll have to be more strategic with your abilities now.
Exactly.
But that's a good thing, right? It encourages more thoughtful gameplay.
Absolutely. Now let's wrap up our champion discussion with the ever-controversial Yasuo. Removing his passive crit damage reduction feels like a major change.
It is. It's basically saying, hey, Yasuo, if you want to be a crit monster, you got to commit to it early on.
Exactly. There's no more safety net. If you don't build crit items early, you're going to be much more vulnerable in the early games. It's a high-risk, high-reward scenario now.
Yeah, I can already see the debates raging in online forums about the best new Yasuo builds.
Right.
Will people rush shield bow? Will they try some crazy hybrid builds? It's going to be interesting to see what emerges. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground with the champion changes. Should we move on to item adjustments?
Let's do it and get ready for some potentially big shifts in the way we think about tank items.
I'm sensing some bad news for tank enthusiasts. What's happening to our beloved tank items?
Well, remember how we were talking about those tank items being too dominant?
Right.
Well, Riot has heard the cries of squishy champions everywhere, and they are taking action. Abyssal Mask, Fimbulwinter, Heartsteel, and Unending Despair are all getting nerfed this patch.
Wow, they're really not holding back. Those are some pretty significant nerfs to some of the most popular tank items.
They are. And it's going to have a ripple effect throughout the game.
Yeah.
Tanks won't be as unkillable as they used to be.
Right.
Which means other roles will have more opportunities to shine.
So it's a good time to be a damage dealer. But what about those crit ADCs? Are they getting any love in the item department?
They are indeed. They're getting a nice little gift in the form of a price reduction for Infinity Edge.
Ooh, cheaper Infinity Edge. That's music to the ears of any crit ADC player.
It is. This change is all about accelerating their power spike.
Okay.
By making Infinity Edge more affordable, Grit ADCs can reach their core build faster. which means they'll be able to start dishing out some serious damage earlier in the game.
So they'll be less reliant on that late game scaling and more able to make an impact in the mid game?
Exactly.
That's a welcome change.
For sure.
But what about those unsung heroes of the item world, the boots? Any noteworthy changes there?
You know it. There are some subtle but important tweaks to a few of the boot options.
Okay.
Rookery treads are getting a cost reduction, which is a nice little buff for tanks.
Makes sense. It'll help them stay a bit more durable in those early skirmishes.
Exactly. And on the other side of the spectrum, pleated steel caps are getting a damage reduction nerf, while symbiotic souls are getting a move speed buff.
So some minor adjustments to the boot options to make each choice a bit more distinct. But let's talk about something a little more monstrous. Remember Otacon, that epic creature that sometimes joins the battle?
Of course. How could we forget about Otacon? Well, Riot is making some interesting changes to the way its form spawns in the game.
Oh yeah, you mentioned that earlier. They're tying it to the bloodiness of the game, right? But can you elaborate on what that actually means in terms of gameplay?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Basically, Otacon can spawn in different forms with different abilities and strengths.
Okay.
And now, those forms will be influenced by how aggressive the early game is.
Okay.
If teams are constantly fighting and racking up kills, Otacon is more likely to spawn in a more aggressive form, maybe one that focuses on dealing damage or disrupting team fights.
Right.
But if the early game is more passive, Otacon might spawn in a more supportive form, maybe one that provides shields or heals to its allies.
Wow, that's so cool. It makes Otacon feel much more dynamic and unpredictable.
Right.
You won't know what to expect until it spawns, and that adds a whole new layer of strategy to the game. Do you think this will encourage teams to play more aggressively in the early game, hoping to influence Otacon's form?
It's definitely possible. I think it'll lead to some interesting decision-making.
Yeah.
Do you risk pushing for early kills and potentially getting a more aggressive Otacon on your side? Or do you play it safe and hope for a more supportive form? It's a gamble either way.
I love it. It's these kinds of dynamic changes that keep the game feeling fresh and exciting. It's not just about buffs and nerfs. It's about adding these new layers of depth and strategy. All right, we've covered champion updates, item adjustments, and even Otacon's new tricks. What else is on the agenda for this epic patch?
Well, get ready to rally your team and prepare for battle, because the 2025 Clash schedule has been revealed.
Clash, yes. It's always a blast to team up with friends and compete against other players in a more structured and competitive environment. What does the schedule look like this year? Any surprises?
Get ready for 6 thrilling Clash tournaments throughout the year. And hold on to your hats because they are bringing back the Ayers and Aram Cups.
No way. Arif and Aram Cups are back. That's amazing news. Those are always some of the most fun and chaotic Clash tournaments. I can't wait to see what kind of crazy strategies and team comps people come up with.
I know, right? It's a chance to really let loose and try out some unconventional builds and playstyles.
Yeah.
And to make things even better, they're reducing the VP requirements for rewards.
Okay.
Which means it'll be easier than ever to earn those sweet Clash trophies and banners.
More rewards for everyone. I'm all for it. It's great to see Riot making Clash more accessible and rewarding for players of all skill levels, but let's not forget about those two beloved game modes, Aram and Arif. Any specific changes we need to be aware of?
You bet. Let's start with the bane of many Aram players' existence, Teemo.
Oh boy, here we go.
He's getting a mixed bag of adjustments this time around.
The Teemo Aram saga continues. What are they doing to our favorite or least favorite Nordle this time?
Well, on the one hand, they're reducing his R damage and slow, which is a welcome change for anyone who's ever been on the receiving end of a Teemo Shroom party.
Right.
But on the other hand, they're increasing his R charges and giving him some ability haste reduction.
Okay.
So it's a bit of a trade-off.
Less damage per shroom, but more shrooms overall. It's a classic case of 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Right.
I guess we'll have to wait and see how those changes actually play out in practice.
Exactly. It'll be interesting to see if he becomes more of a nuisance with the extra shrooms or if the damage reduction is enough to keep him in check.
Right.
But there is one more Aram-specific change that's worth mentioning.
Okay.
Unending Despair is getting a buff with an increased healing multiplier.
Okay.
This could potentially make it a more viable option for tanks in that game mode, especially those who rely on healing to stay alive in those chaotic team fights.
So a little love for Aram tanks. Like it. It's always good to see some variety in the item builds, even in a more random game mode like Aram.
Exactly.
But what about ARRF? Any adjustments over there?
Just one small but potentially significant tweak.
Hmm.
Range champions are seeing their attack speed bonus slightly nerfed.
Ah, so they're trying to tone down the range dominance a bit in ARURF.
Exactly.
Makes sense. It can be pretty frustrating to play against a team of 5 ranged champions who are all firing at you from a safe distance.
Right.
This change should help even the playing field a bit and make those melee champions a bit more viable in the chaotic world of ARURF. Now, before we move on to our next topic, we can't forget about the ever-tempting Mythic Shop. What treasures await us this time?
Yeah.
Yes, the Mythic Shop is always a dangerous place for my wallet. What shiny new skins and chromas are they trying to lure us in with this patch?
Get your Mythic Essence ready because some seriously awesome prestige skins are entering the rotation.
Okay.
We're talking Mythmaker Cassiopeia, Pulsefire Lucian, Psyops Ezreal, KDA Evelyn, and Project Zed.
Wow, that's a seriously impressive lineup. Those are some of the most sought-after prestige skins in the game. I can already feel my Mythic Essence dwindling.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's a tough choice. But hey, that's what makes the Mythic Shop so exciting. But for every new arrival, there are also some items that are bidding farewell.
Ah, yes. The bittersweet cycle of the Mythic Shop. What treasures are we saying goodbye to this time?
We're bidding farewell to Prestige Lunar Beast Fiora, Prestige Porcelain Lux, Prestige Porcelain Kindred, Prestige Dragon Mancer Rakan, and a whole bunch of other goodies.
Wow.
So if you've been eyeing any of those items, now's your last chance to snag them before they disappear into the Mythic Vault.
Good reminder. Don't hesitate if there's something you've been wanting to grab. Once those items are gone, they're gone for good. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we have to acknowledge those unsung heroes of every patch, the bug fixes.
Absolutely. Behind every smooth-running game is a team of dedicated developers who are constantly working to squash those pesky bugs and improve the overall player experience.
And this patch is no exception. Riot has addressed a long list of issues, including that infamous Rengar Books bug,
Yes.
the ultimate pets drawing minion aggro bug, and many more.
It's those little quality-of-life improvements that can make a big difference in our enjoyment of the game. Now let's move on to the more glamorous side of things. New skins and chromas.
Ah, yes. The eye candy that makes our champions look fabulous on the Rift. What new cosmetic delights await us this patch?
We've got the stylish Masked Justice skin line dropping for Lucian, Senna, and Yoni,
Okay.
and the visually stunning Quantum Galaxy Slayer Zed skin.
Very nice.
And of course, there are matching chromas for the Masked Justice line, so you can really customize your look and stand out from the crowd.
So much style. It's clear that Riot is pulling out all the stops with this patch. We've got champion updates, item adjustments, clash news, ARM and ARF tweaks, Mythic Shop rotations, bug fixes, and a whole lot of new cosmetic goodies. A lot to take in.
It is. But we've broken down the most important changes and what they mean for you.
Right.
Now it's time to dive even deeper and explore how these updates will affect your individual playstyle and strategies.
Exactly. We've laid the groundwork, but the real fun begins when you start applying this knowledge to your own games. Stay tuned because in the next part, we'll be analyzing how these changes might impact different champions, roles, and playstyles. It's going to get interesting.
All right, welcome back to the final stretch of our deep dive into League of Legends patch 25.04. We've covered a ton of ground, from champion reworks to clash updates and even those sneaky Teemo buffs in the jungle. But now let's bring it all home. What does this massive patch actually mean for you?
That's a key question, right? It's all well and good to know about the changes, but the real impact comes when you hit the Rift and start putting those changes to the test. So let's talk strategy.
Okay, let's start with those Ashe buffs. Those feel pretty straightforward. More damage equals more wins, right?
Well, it's not quite that simple. Yes, she's got a damage boost, especially on that ult, but it's about more than just clicking R and hoping for the best. Ashe players need to think about positioning and timing those arrows to maximize their impact. This could be her time to really shine in those late-game team fights. So a bit of finesse required, but the potential is definitely there. Now Diana players have a more complex choice to make. Stick with the jungle and adapt to the nerfs, or embrace the mid lane buffs and explore those new build paths.
Exactly. Jungle Diana will need to be more careful about their early clears, maybe prioritize ganking over power farming. But mid lane Diana, that opens up a whole world of possibilities. Maybe Bruiser Diana becomes the new hotness.
I can't wait to see what crazy builds people come up with. Now, Elise players, it seems like the jungle is calling.
It does, doesn't it? Those spider form buffs are substantial, but mastering her jungle pathing and ganking timings will be crucial. For those who loved her lane presence, well, it might be time to broaden your champion pool.
Adaptability is key in League, right? Now, male players, it's time to embrace a bit more finesse. Those counterplay changes mean you can't just face roll your lane opponent anymore.
Absolutely. No more autopilot Mel. Players need to be much more aware of their positioning, pick their engagements carefully, and really make those late game power spikes count.
So less early aggression, more calculated plays. Now, for those who love a good hook, Nautilus is ready to make a splash. That Q damage buff is no joke.
Nope. Land that hook and watch the enemy squirm. He'll be a menace in lane and a force to be reckoned with in those early skirmishes. A good Nautilus player can really control the pace of the game now.
I'm already hearing the cries of OP echoing across the rift. Now, for a champion we don't often see in the jungle, Teemo is back with a vengeance. Those E buffs are going to make those shrooms sprout like mushrooms after the rain.
I know, right? I can already picture those unsuspecting junglers stumbling into a minefield of Teemo shrooms. His clear speed should be much faster, and his ganking potential could be surprisingly strong.
It'll be fascinating to see how the meta adapts to this new shroom-filled jungle threat. Now, Warwick top lane players, that key mana cost increase means you can't just spam abilities willy-nilly anymore.
Exactly. Mana management is key now. Smart Warwick players will need to choose their engagements carefully and prioritize sustain over constant aggression. It's a subtle change, but it could have a big impact on his laning phase.
And finally, Yasuo players, get ready to embrace the crit life or face the consequences. That passive crit damage reduction removal is a game changer.
No more messing around with hybrid builds. If you want to unleash the full power of Yasuo, you need to stack that crit chance early and often. But beware, it also makes him much more vulnerable in the early game.
High risk, high reward. That's the Yasuo way, right? Okay, champion updates are covered. Let's tackle those item changes. Tank players, those nerfs to your favorite items are going to sting a bit.
They are. Abyssal Mask, Fimbulwinter, Heartsteel, and Unending Despair all taking a hit. Tanky builds will still be viable, but they won't be the unkillable behemoths they once were.
So what's a tank to do?
Adaptation is key. Experiment with different item combinations. Consider going for more hybrid builds that incorporate damage or utility items. It's a new era for tanks, and those who can adapt will thrive.
Meanwhile, crit ADC players are probably doing a little victory dance right now. That cheaper Infinity Edge is going to make them a force to be reckoned with in the mid-game.
Oh, absolutely. Reaching that core build faster means they can start pumping out serious damage earlier. Watch out for those power spikes.
No more waiting until the late game to become relevant. Crit ADCs are back in the spotlight. And let's not forget about those boot tweaks. Mercury treads are more affordable for tanks, plated steel caps got nerfed, and symbiotic souls got a speed boost.
It's all about fine-tuning those choices and making sure each boot option has its own unique strengths and weaknesses. Choose wisely based on your champion and playstyle.
And speaking of unique, those out-of-con form adjustments add a whole new layer of strategy to the game. Now you have to factor in the early game aggression when deciding how to approach those objectives.
Exactly. Is it worth risking a more aggressive Atacon by pushing for early kills? Or do you play it safe and hope for a more supportive form? It's a fascinating new wrinkle that will definitely shake things up.
I can't wait to see how it plays out in those high-stakes Clash matches. And speaking of Clash, 6 tournaments, including the return of Arif and ARAM Cups. Get those teams ready.
I know, right? It's going to be a blast. And with those reduced VP requirements, earning rewards will be even more satisfying.
ARAM and Arif players, those balance changes are worth paying attention to. Teemo's shroom shenanigans got toned down a bit. Unending Despair got a buff for those ARAM tanks, and ranged champions in Arif will need to adjust to that attack speed nerf.
Small changes can have big consequences in those fast-paced game modes.
And Mythic Shop enthusiasts, don't miss out on those awesome prestige skins entering the rotation. Mythmaker Cassiopeia, Pulsefire Lucian, Psyops Ezreal, KDA Evelynn, and Project Zed, they're all calling your name.
But remember, some items are leaving the shop as well. Don't let those prestige skins slip through your fingers.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've dissected patch 25.04 from top to bottom, explored the implications, and even strategized about how to adapt to these game-changing updates.
But ultimately, the most important thing is to jump into the game and experience these changes firsthand. Experiment, explore, and have fun.
That's what League of Legends is all about, right? It's a constantly evolving game that keeps us on our toes, challenges us to adapt, and rewards us with those moments of brilliance and triumph.
Exactly. So get out there, summoners, embrace the new patch, and see what legends you can create.
Until next time, good luck on the Rift.